So, let's talk about the Traveler. The Traveler is our main character, and as such, one would expect them to be at the center of the main story in Genshin Impact. We get praised everywhere we go. We are constantly reminded for our heroic efforts, and we have gained the affections of far more people than we might have deserved to receive. One interesting thought that prompted me to start the series was challenging the importance of the Traveler's role in each nation. So that is what this series is about. Of course, just looking at the plot in its entirety, some fans may already have made their minds up, but I was interested in diving into the details. So, what if the Traveler never came to Region X? How would the story change if the characters of every Archon Quest had to face their respective crises without the main character's aid? How would events change? And of course, whether the difference warrants the endless glazing we get. But before we do that, we must address the elephant in the room, the topic of fate. Fate is a phenomenon that few people in the world of Teyvat seem to understand, and it is an incredibly powerful force that few have the power to oppose. Because the Traveler is a Descender, and the Descenders have the power to rewrite and change fate, by removing the Traveler, we are effectively deciphering the fate of Teyvat as originally intended by the laws binding the world. This video, however, is not about fate. Or, more specifically, it is not a video that aims to discuss the mechanics of fate and its power over the people of Teyvat. My personal motivation for making this video, besides making content for all of you watching of course, is simply to measure how worthy the Traveler is of all the glazing and protagonist worship that plagues this game. Now, let's establish the rules of this What If. The divergence point comes on the beaches of Stormbearer Point. The Traveler is still here. They're just going to take a little longer to wake up than usual. And when I say longer, I mean not for the entirety of the scenario. That means everything prior to this point remains the same. The battle against the unknown god still occurs, the Abyss sibling still goes through their own journey 500 years ago, etc. Also, we're only going to cover the Archon Quest for the time being. So that means no world quests, no Dainsleif, no flagship events. Although that will definitely change for future chapters because certain Archon quests have events that are dependent on interludes and events, but thankfully it will not be relevant here for a while. So, without further delay, let's begin. The story officially begins in Mondstadt, the Outlander who didn't catch the wind. The Traveler remains dormant on the beaches of Stormbearer Point, and that means Paimon remains dormant as well. This is not their story, so we must move on towards the City of Freedom. Within the Whispering Woods just beyond Mondstadt, the Animal Archon makes his attempt to comfort the dragon known as Storm Terror. In the original timeline, it is the Traveler who unfortunately disturbed them, causing the dragon to fly away. Without the Traveler, one would argue that Venti makes better progress. However, that progress would be short-lived. It would be the outrider of the Knights of Favonius who would disturb them in the Traveler's place. Amber was not far from their location in the original story, after all. Seeing what appeared to be a civilian in close proximity to a dangerous creature, Amber would falsely interpret a danger to the bard as she tries to intervene. This would, however, disturb the dragon in the same manner as the original. The bard disappeared in the chaos, and in the place where he once stood, a mysterious red crystal floats with an ominous energy. When Amber tries to touch it, she feels a stinging pain course through her body. Wait a minute, this energy feels familiar. It brings back memories from a certain incident 2 years ago. She had to report this to the Knights, but she finds herself unable to take the object. In the original story, Lisa experienced the same phenomenon. Unfortunately, that means Amber regrettably has to leave it behind. It was unfortunate, but perhaps an opportunity may come in the future to investigate it further. It was best to report this incident to the Knights of Favonius for the time being, so she decides to return to Mondstadt City. Upon Amber's return to Mondstadt, however, the peace was short-lived, as Storm Terror takes the fight directly to the city of Mondstadt. How dare the humans of Mondstadt disturb him at every turn? He took a risk by trusting the Archon, only for his subjects to prove time and time again their betrayal. He takes his anger out on the people, conjuring storms like in the original story. Without the Traveler here to receive the blessing of the Thousand Winds, Mondstadt finds themselves in a slightly harder predicament than the original. I would think Jean steps up here instead, her animal vision making her the knight most compatible to receive Barbados' blessing, and shouldering excessive burdens is kind of her thing. Now, you, the viewer, may be a bit skeptical at this decision, along with any decisions I make later on in the What If, but I'll explain it all at the end of the video. So, anyways, with the help of Barbados' blessing, Jean was able to successfully repel the dragon. With the immediate threat finally addressed, Amber wastes no time reporting what she found. The dragon was spotted in the Whispering Woods, and at their side was a strange bard standing calmly before it. After startling the dragon, the bard vanished into thin air, and the dragon flew towards Mondstadt to launch an attack on the city, but not before leaving a strange, teardrop-shaped crystal. This was a lead that absolutely needed investigating, both the corrupted crystal and the mysterious bard. Jean would have to call upon the Knight's investigation company for this one, but unfortunately Albedo is still stationed at Dragonspine, and it would take some time to reach him. Lisa would identify the Four Winds temples as the most pressing matter to address. The Knights would need to clear 3 of the 4 temples to disperse the storms covering Mondstadt. However, the strange crystal also presented a valuable clue. If they could collect the sample for study, it may go a long way towards dealing with storm terror. This is where Sucrose comes in. As a member of the Knight's investigation company and direct assistant to Albedo, she decides to volunteer and investigate the crystal. Amber, in this case, would no longer be deployed to the Temple of the Falcon, for she was needed to escort Sucrose to the place the crystal was last seen. However, that would leave one of the Four Winds temples unaccounted for. Should Jean call for Eula? No, Eula is on reconnaissance and likely too far away to reach in time. How about Noelle? It would be irresponsible to send Noelle on such a dangerous mission like this. She was too reckless and would probably overexert herself. That means the only option left was for the one most in character for the acting Grandmaster. Jean would have to do it herself. Well, for a brief moment, Klee did come to mind, but knowing her, there probably won't be a temple left standing by the time she was done. Of course, this decision would be met with mild disapproval from the other knights. Jean was once again trying to do too much on her own. Unfortunately, though, the knights were woefully short on firepower, with Varka being gone and all. Amber wants to complain, but finds herself unable to. This wouldn't be the first time the acting Grandmaster had to cover for her, after all. The events thus in the temples would still unfold the same as the original story, with the temples still being cleared as usual. But this time, there was a unique mission for Amber. When Amber and Sucrose returned to the Whispering Woods, they discovered the crystal was no longer there. This is exactly what Amber was afraid of. This was why she didn't want to leave it behind. However, their mission would not turn up empty-handed, for it appeared a battle took place at the scene. Sucrose suggested that Elemental Sight could reveal more clues, which prompts Amber to use Elemental Sight on her surroundings. And yes, Amber has Elemental Sight. This was confirmed in her story quest. Upon the use of Elemental Sight, Amber detected multiple elemental signatures at the scene, one of which being Animo. Someone was here and had to fight somebody, or something, before taking off with the crystal. But who? Sucrose noted the unusual appearance of Animo energy on the scene. It's very unlikely to be a monster, for Animo slimes are usually airborne and rarely leave traces on the ground. It can't be an Eye of the Storm either, for they only appear around leyline disruptions, and there is no such disruption noted here in the Whispering Woods. And it certainly wasn't Beth, the Animo hypostasis. That meant only a vision holder could have been responsible. Thanks to Sucrose's expertise on the matter, despite failing to recover the corrupted crystal, they managed to gain some valuable intel. It was difficult to tell what happened here with just these clues, but it was plenty enough because it confirmed the value of the corrupted crystal. Before long, the two noticed that the skies of Mondstadt started to clear. The storm clouds are dispersing, and the sun would shine on Mondstadt once again. That means the other knights had completed their missions. Maybe the others had key findings to report. So with Amber and Sucrose returning to Mondstadt, Act 1 would come to a close. Act 2 would begin with Jean having an unpleasant conversation with the Fatui diplomat. Since Jean was the strongest of the knights, it was natural for her to finish and return to Mondstadt before everyone else. The Fatui, however, are not impressed. The knights are so ill-equipped that their acting Grand Master is forced to do grunt work out in the field. It certainly wasn't the most glowing display of competence from the Fatui's perspective. However, like the original, Jean rejects the Fatui's offer and insists in their own ability to solve the crisis. Amber and Sucrose run into her on the way back, and the three of them return to the Knights HQ to reconvene with the other Knights and share their findings. They would meet again in the Grand Master's office. Amber and Sucrose would report that the corrupted crystal was gone, and that a battle may have occurred at the scene with the victors taking off with it, along with the specific elemental energies detected on the scene. Kaya, however, chooses to keep the information about the Abyss Mage to himself for the time being. Having more experience with the Abyss than anybody else, it's probably best to conduct some independent investigations and avoid alerting the enemy. That's always been Kaya's way of doing things. Plus, he is suspicious of potential infiltrators within Mondstadt's walls. It was probably best to pursue his leads independently and report after further progress. He does, however, comment on Amber's report, suggesting that the Animo presence was likely the work of an Animo vision. Most likely the work of that bard that Amber saw with Dvalin. He might have went back to retrieve the item, believing it to be valuable. The investigation trail was running cold, with the only lead left to pursue the mysterious bard seen with Dvalin before the attack. This line of work was not unfamiliar to the knights, thinking back to the Kali incident. All they had to do was track down the bard and try to get answers out of him. That task wouldn't prove too difficult, as in the original timeline, the Traveler found the bard performing publicly before the statue. Only this time, instead of the Traveler finding him, it would be Amber finding him. Again. The bard recited a story about Dvalin's past, and upon seeing Amber, he identifies Amber as the one who scared Dvalin away. Amber apologizes for her recklessness and asks the bard to identify himself. He introduces himself as Venti and confirms indeed he was the one who was with Dvalin that day. He also revealed he was the one who returned the corrupted crystal, and the other elemental signatures were from Abyss mages who tried to stop him. Amber recalls her inability to touch the objects for their strong objection to visions, which then prompts Venti to reveal that they are Dvalin's teardrops tainted with abyssal energy. They are dangerous to the touch, but he knows of a way to purify them, and asks the young knight to follow him to the symbol of Mondstadt's hero. Amber refuses and asserts that they should first report this to the knights, but unfortunately, Venti was too fast, and before long he was already gone. Not knowing if Venti was an ally or enemy at this stage of the crisis, Amber decides to return to the Knights HQ and report to Jean. Jean is intrigued by this news and decrees she will accompany Amber to the symbol of Mondstadt's hero. Because Jean had her own suspicions about the bard's identity. The blessing she received during the attack on Mondstadt came with a familiar voice, and this young bard was allegedly able to approach Dvalin without issue. The only person with the power to be capable of such things could only be... Well, there was only one way to find out. Venti later spots Jean and Amber approaching him and greets them under the tree. Upon hearing his voice, Jean immediately recognizes it as the one who spoke to her during the attack on Mondstadt. He confirms that indeed, he was the one who assisted the knights that day. Jean acknowledges the important role Venti has played, and tells him that he's been the one person the knights have been searching for since the whole incident started. He seemed to be at the center of every major event throughout the ordeal, and sternly asked Venti to explain himself. Venti was not interested in running, knowing very well they were on the same page. He explains the truth about Dvalin. Dvalin was poisoned by the Abyss and tormented by its corruption. He was subsequently led astray by the Abyss Order, an organization of abyssal creatures with a profound disdain for humanity and the gods. He then took out the red crystals and revealed that they were Dvalin's crystallized teardrops tainted by the abyss. Amber confirms to Jean that those teardrops were what she found that day in the Whispering Woods. Jean tries to examine the teardrops, and upon getting close, the teardrops sharply rejects her. Amber then remembers that Venti claimed he had a way to purify them, and asks how that was possible. Venti responds by placing the teardrops near the great tree, and slowly the teardrops changed color, its red tint shifting to light teal. The teardrops were successfully purified and now safe to touch. You seem to know a lot about the circumstances surrounding Dvalin. How do you know so much, and where did you obtain the power to communicate with him? Jean asks Venti, suspicious of his true identity, but Venti simply dismisses the feats as talents of a skilled bard, and that his melody was enchanting enough to reach Dvalin. Amber, being none the wiser and not yet connecting the dots, asks Venti how they can then save Dvalin, to which he responds he needs the Holy Lyre Der Hamel. Jean immediately interjects, "The Holy Lyre Der Hamel? That is a massive demand from this bard, and even if everything he said was true, Jean doesn't have unilateral authority to retrieve it. They would need signed documents from herself, the Seneschal, and the community leaders, but the Seneschal left on Varka's expedition. There was no way to retrieve the lyre legally anytime soon. Still, to give up this lead would be catastrophic for the Knights. They needed to resolve this crisis soon or risk losing ground to the Fatui. Plus, there wasn't any other way they knew of that could help save Dvalin. Since Dvalin was a friend of the Animo Archon, then maybe only the power of the Animo Archon stood a chance at saving him. After thinking it through, she decides to ask the most important question. Venti, are you the Animo Archon? Venti responds by congratulating Jean for figuring it out, leaving Amber dumbfounded by everything that happened. The next step then was clear. After the Knights take the time to process the situation under this new light, Jean makes the bold declaration that she will override the existing permissions and retrieve the lyre. She will also take full responsibility for any political fallout that follows. Amber once again expressed disapproval at Jean's propensity to shoulder every burden alone, but there was nothing she could say to sway the acting Grand Master. Having decided on the plan, Jean orders Amber to return to the Knights HQ and inform the other captains. Jean will accompany Venti to the cathedral to retrieve the Holy Lyre. Against the wills of the Sisters of the Cathedral, Jean causes an uproar at the church by forcing her way into the Lyre's chambers. Jean insists that retrieving the Holy Lyre is pivotal towards solving the Storm Terror crisis, and that she will take any reprimand that is to follow after the crisis was over. Unfortunately for the church, nobody was strong enough to stop Jean, in neither authority nor force. However, when they arrive at the scene, they would be met with an unfortunate surprise. The lyre was gone! And with no trace of the thief anywhere, the church and the knights were left stunned. In the original story, the traveler was caught at the chamber of the lyre and pursued as the suspect. However, after being cleared of suspicion, it didn't take our party very long to narrow down the location of the Holy Lyre. In this scenario, I would believe the Fatui become immediate suspects in the subsequent investigation, especially after the last series of Fatui incidents in Mondstadt fresh on everyone's minds. Jean thus holds a private meeting with the young master of the Dawn Winery, Diluc, for his aid. Diluc has his own suspicions with the Fatui for a while, and has been conducting counter-espionage in secret this whole time, so he and Jean together find the location of the Holy Lyre, same as the original story. To avoid diplomatic backlash, Diluc and Venti will be the ones to infiltrate the Fatui hideout and recover the stolen lyre. The events then play out the same in the Fatui domain, with Venti replacing the Traveler. Or maybe Venti doesn't go. It doesn't matter, because the results still play out the same. Upon arrival at the hideout, it is revealed that the Fatui were previously assaulted by the Abyss Order, likely looking to destroy the lyre and prevent any chance of Dvalin's death. None of that matters, though, for they have failed. The lyre now finds itself back in the hands of Mondstadt's heroes. Unfortunately, though, upon closer examination, the lyre appears to be out of power. It was in no position to sway Dvalin in its current state. Venti reveals the liar's power needs to be restored with purified Dvalan teardrops. This prompts Jean to ask about the incident at the Whispering Woods. Could the Abyss Order know about the teardrops and be collecting them as well? Venti responds by speculating. It's unlikely the Abyss knows about the purifying properties of the teardrops, but because they saw him collecting them, they attempted to deny him the teardrops, believing they were key to the Archon's plan somehow. Diluc asks then if they are in a race with the Abyss Order to collect the tears. Venti reassures him no, as Dvalan will always be crying as long as the Abyss still corrodes him. The best way to proceed, then, is to search known areas Dvalan was confirmed spotted, and scout the area for teardrops. Jean thus calls for the aid of the reconnaissance company, as well as the aid of the Outriders to keep a lookout for Dvalan's teardrops, and report any they find. Venti takes it upon himself to handle the teardrops for safety's sake, and take them to the Great Tree in Windrise for purification. It's a much slower process without the Traveler, but eventually the heroes collect enough purified teardrops to fully restore the liar's power. The subsequent events play out identically to the original story. The heroes take the lyre to Star-Thatched Cliff to summon Dvalan, and the Abyss Mage destroys the Holy Lyre. Dvalan is enraged at the sight of Venti's companions and flees the scene. The next scene is where things get a little weird and could have series-ending implications for the future of my What If. The dragon is seen flying over Old Mondstadt, with the Abyss siblings seen leading the mages. In this scenario, the Traveler is absent, not only for Mondstadt but for all subsequent Archon quests. We know this doesn't stop the Abyss sibling from meddling with Dvalan. That was in the works before they discovered the Traveler's presence. So, the Mondstadt Archon quest remains relatively unaffected, but I'm not sure what crazy butterfly effect this will have on future quests. It's very possible our What If will not make it to the end, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. For now, Act 2 of Mondstadt comes to a close. Act 3 is perhaps the most straightforward of the acts, but it starts off on a desperate note. With the power of the Holy Lyre now destroyed, the situation is looking increasingly bleak. The heroes are faced with an unwinnable predicament, where the best outcome may be killing Dvalan themselves. The team has to make a difficult decision. If they wish to save Dvalan, they need to find a solution quickly. And if not, they must commit to killing Dvalan themselves, lest the Abyss Order claim the dragon for themselves, or equally dire, the Fatui kill Dvalan and puts Mondstadt back into diplomatic debt. Mondstadt was once under the debt of Dottore from a similar incident, and that is a situation Diluc would never allow happen ever again. Diluc then asks whether there is any hope of saving Dvalan now that the lyre is broken. Jean suggests the symbol of Mondstadt hero, but Venti objects, suggesting corruption of that volume, all being absorbed by the tree, may damage the land itself. Venti always had a backup plan, however. If all else fails, he could reseal Dvalan and return him to a dormant state prior to his awakening. However, he would have no way at the moment to cure him of the abyssal corruption. Jean, however, has one last card to play. Summoned onto the scene, and finally arriving back from Dragonspine, was the chief alchemist, Albedo. Albedo was recalled from Dragonspine to assist in the investigation into Durin's condition. During the search for teardrops, Albedo requested a sample, looking to follow on his own leads. He reveals that the corruption tainting Dvalan comes from the abyssal dragon Durin, during their battle 500 years ago, and that he has been studying Durin's remains for most of his time. Knowing that his master, Gold Rhindaughter, was responsible for creating Durin, he knows that Rhindaughter must have learned of a way to manipulate abyssal energy. He would have to walk in his master's footsteps to find a way to save Dvalan from his fate. He tells the knights that it is possible in theory to save Dvalan, but it would be unlikely he finds a cure in time given the circumstances at play. Venti tells Albedo not to worry. As long as the hope for a cure exists, he will reseal Dvalan for them. Albedo wishes to study the subject in person in hopes of collecting data for his research. He asks to join the party. There was very little reason to refuse, so the other three agree. This was the group that seeks to confront Dvalan in person. The following events would play out the same as the original. The ascent to the summit occurs even faster than the original story. With Albedo's genius intelligence, they waste no time with the mechanical puzzles guarding the seals within the tower. A battle was inevitable upon reaching the top. With Dvalin fully enraged and unwilling to negotiate, his will to fight must be lowered if Venti is to execute the next step of the plan. This battle would expend far more effort out of the Animal Archon than the original. There was no traveler around to simply erase the abyssal corruption, so Venti has to work much harder for his part. The original story required us to attack the abyssal spikes on his body, and here the heroes still do that, but doing so does not solve the problem like the original. Dvalin here must be beaten to a degree no longer capable of resisting, by which Venti would open communications and seal him away. This sequence would likely play out in a similar manner to the sealing of Azdaha in Liyue, with the remaining good in Dvalin's consciousness eventually accepting his fate. We won't spend too much time describing this scene. Without the Traveler here, the battle against Dvalin ends in a tragic parting of ways, and a promise that Venti will free him from his suffering, no matter how long it takes. The team then returns to Mondstadt after a successful mission. The remaining knights hold off an invasion of the city during this time, thanks to the efforts of Outrider Amber. Amber in this timeline enjoys far greater recognition for her heroic efforts than the original. She was hailed a hero just the same as the Dvalin party, and even inspires interest in reviving the Outrider Company. Kaya, in the meantime, had been conducting his own private investigation this whole time, and discovered the Abyss Order follow a leader, known as the Heir. The invasion of Mondstadt likely depended on internal sabotage to succeed, which Kaya has eliminated in secret. This information would eventually be shared with the other knights, but for now it is time to return the Holy Liar Der Himmel to the Church. The Church, for all that has happened with the Liar, ultimately chooses not to pursue retaliation against Jean. Venti, upon leaving the cathedral after his usual mischievous antics, finds himself ambushed by the Fatui Harbinger. The events here still play out identical to the original, with the Gnosis ripped out of Venti's chest. He would later return to Windrise and reflect on everything that happened. Before the story comes to a close, however, a familiar face would arrive to meet him. Albedo requests a moment to chat with Venti, who he now recognizes as the Animo Archon. The two of them have a shared history with the Cataclysm. Venti would share his side of the story with Dvalin, and Albedo would share everything he knows about Durin. At the end of the exchange, Albedo makes a request to Venti. If they are to free Dvalin, he would like Venti to assist him in his research. Venti doesn't answer right away. He responds by telling Albedo that he'll take some time to think about it. And so the screen fades to black, and Act 3 of the Mondstadt Archon Quest comes to a conclusion. And so, Mondstadt's story officially comes to a close. So, as promised, it's time to evaluate the impact of the Traveler from the story. From a writing perspective, the absence of the Traveler, I'd say, makes the conflict more interesting, since Abyssal Purification effectively shortcuts the problem. Other characters are easily able to fill the void, with Jean and Amber being the biggest winners in character development. With the Dvalin problem not yet fully resolved, this may give rise to unlikely partnerships, like with Venti and Albedo. This was to be expected, since the Traveler's conflict concerns their sibling, and the sibling rarely takes center stage in the Archon Quest. The story definitely takes on a darker tone with a bittersweet ending, which I think makes it more interesting. Overall, I think this exercise highlights how low stakes Mondstadt's story was as a whole, while the worst case scenario was never going to be as bad as what the other nations would later face. So, sad as it is to say for Traveler fans, the absence of the Traveler, I'd say, makes Mondstadt's story better. Now, for the impact within the universe itself, the Traveler marks salvation for Dvalin. That is undeniable. Mondstadt is definitely better off for this, but that payoff hasn't been felt much at all throughout the story. Perhaps that might change with the upcoming Mondstadt event. I wouldn't know, since this was recorded before it came out, but future me may say something in the comments. As far as the people of Mondstadt are concerned, the Traveler Glaze is somewhat justified. They effectively ended all animosity between the dragon and the people. The contribution here is not saving the nation, but in bringing peace to a misunderstood conflict. So, therefore, I evaluate the Traveler Glaze with lukewarm approval. Finally, addressing certain caveats here before anybody else does, there are certain parts of the stories which one may find the events debatable. Time to address every detail I was unsure of at the time of writing. First concerns Jean fending off the dragon in Act 1. It may feel strange for Jean to be blasted into the air and shoot wind missiles at Dvalin, but I do think this makes sense since we do this again in Act 3. There's a cutscene showing Venti landing on the platform with the others following behind. That implies together with the Traveler, Diluc and Jean were likely flying together with them. Abyssal Purification is the Traveler's special power, so I don't think this was a Traveler exclusive ability. Regardless though, even if Jean doesn't receive the Blessing of the Thousand Winds, Dvalin would likely just be repelled by other means. There are other minor details that one may object to, like Sucrose's involvement or lack thereof, Jean's questionable decision to seize the Holy Lyre, or Albedo sharing key details about Durin he may or may not have known yet at this point, but overall they aren't decisions I think break the scenario. If anything, I think this demonstrates how rigid fate truly is for the world of Teyvat. But of course, one major concern I do have for the future of the story is the Abyss sibling. Because the Traveler is absent, the entire story of the Abyss sibling and Conria may find itself derailed completely. Personally, I'm not sure how far this scenario could go in the grand story of Genshin Impact, before we reach a dead end. Especially when multiple storylines begin to converge, where events and interludes and world quests become a part of the Archon Quest. I can't guarantee that the series will make it all the way to Notcry, which is where we are now. We'll take it one chapter at a time though and see what happens. Anyways, feel free to comment your thoughts about this series, and like and share the video if you enjoyed. The story next chapter will take us to Liyue, where both the Adeptus and the humans must navigate the passing of Rex Lapis, of tensions between new and old, and the scheming of the Fatui without the Traveler. I have not yet started the draft for Liyue as of this video's recording, so I have no idea how things will turn out, but it promises to be exciting. And so, this is where we'll part ways, dear viewer. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.